There comes a moment in life when everything collapses. Not just the outer world, but the inner world. The story you were telling yourself breaks apart. The person you thought you were disappears. The plans you made no longer make sense. The future feels like a blank page you're afraid to write on. And in that silence, in that space, the question rises, what now? This is the moment few people talk about. The moment after the failure, after the loss, after the betrayal, after the burnout, after the identity you wrapped yourself in no longer fits. The moment when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who's looking back. Not because you've changed, but because everything else has. Rebuilding from nothing is not just about fixing what's broken. It's about choosing what comes next. It's about making decisions from the ground up, without the weight of the past, without the illusion of who you thought you needed to be. It's about stripping life down to its essentials and asking, if I had to start over, who would I build? Because this is not a curse. This is a chance. This is the opportunity most people never get. A chance to rewrite. A chance to reconstruct your values, your identity, your environment, your direction. A chance to stop performing and start building. From truth, from clarity, from a place you've never lived from before. But it won't be easy. The hardest part about rebuilding is not the effort. It's the uncertainty, the silence, the stillness, the long hours where nothing makes sense, where progress feels invisible, where the world doesn't applaud your new beginning because they didn't notice your ending. You will feel alone. You will feel misunderstood. You will be tempted to go back. Not because the past was better, but because it was familiar. But familiarity is not the same as freedom. And what you're building now is freedom. Brick by brick, word by word, decision by decision. And you don't need a master plan to begin. You just need to stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending it's not broken. Stop pretending you're okay. Stop pretending you're still the same person. You're not. You're new. You're raw. You're real. And that's where real strength begins. So, this is the journey. This is the blueprint. Not for fixing, but for creating. Not for recovering, but for becoming. Not for going back, but for building something you've never had. A life built from nothing that becomes everything. The first step in rebuilding yourself from nothing is to admit where you actually are. Not where you wish you were. Not where other people think you are. Where you are. Without denial. Without blame. Without excuses. Because you cannot change what you refuse to name. And most people never rebuild because they never get honest about what's broken. They keep moving fast so they don't have to feel. They keep themselves busy so they don't have to face the silence. They hide behind half-truths and vague language. I'm just figuring things out. I just need time. I'm okay, just a little off. But the truth is they're lost. They're empty. They're scared. They're unsure of who they are or what comes next. That's where the rebuild begins. In the quiet, in the rubble, in the moment where you stop pretending and say it out loud. This isn't working. I've been lying to myself. I don't know who I am right now. Those words are not weakness. They are the doorway. Because now the foundation is real. There is a kind of strength that only comes from being stripped bare. When you have nothing left to protect, nothing left to perform for, nothing left to hide behind, you can finally start building something that's actually yours. And from that place, the next step is to create structure. Not the illusion of productivity, not mindless movement, but deliberate structure. Because when your world falls apart, your mind goes with it. The routines that used to keep you steady are gone. The purpose that used to keep you focused has disappeared. So now you create new scaffolding. It starts small. You wake up at the same time. You make your bed. You go for a walk. You drink water. You write something down. You move your body. You give your mind something to focus on that doesn't require external validation. These are not chores. These are anchors. Because right now, you don't need breakthroughs. You need rhythm. You need a beat to return to. A pattern to hold on to while everything else still feels uncertain. And the more consistent that rhythm becomes, the more solid the ground beneath your feet feels. You're not rebuilding a brand. You're rebuilding a backbone. You're teaching yourself to show up when no one's watching, to stay steady when nothing feels clear, to take action even when you feel like nothing's changing. Because action is the seed. It's the thing that pulls you forward, even if the progress is invisible. You're not looking for speed. You're looking for alignment. You're not measuring results. You're measuring integrity. Did I do what I said I would do? Did I keep my promise to myself? Did I hold the line when the old version of me wanted to quit? Because that's where the real rebuild happens. In the moments where no one else would know if you quit, but you don't. In the moments where it would be easier to escape, to distract, to numb, but you choose presence instead. And yes, it will be hard. Some days you'll wonder what the point is. You'll feel like nothing's working. You'll question everything. But those are the moments that matter most. Because if you can stay steady there, if you can stay committed there, you are becoming someone unshakable. Your job is not to feel better. Your job is to stay aligned. Your job is to hold the line. Your job is to keep stacking the small wins, because those small wins will start to compound. Not just in results, but in identity. Every time you show up, you reinforce a new belief. I am someone who doesn't quit. I am someone who keeps going. I am someone who rebuilds. And eventually that belief becomes real. It becomes who you are. Not because someone gave it to you. Not because you read it in a book, but because you earned it. Day by day, hour by hour, choice by choice. You built it in the dark, and one day it will carry you into the light. Once you've established the first layer, awareness, structure, and small acts of integrity, the next phase of rebuilding is even harder. Letting go of the identity that collapsed, the image of yourself that no longer fits, the story that used to carry you but now feels hollow, the expectations you had for your life that didn't work out. Most people try to rebuild by patching over the cracks. They try to restore what they had before. They try to climb back to the same version of success, the same version of identity, the same story they were living, only shinier, cleaner, louder. But that's not rebuilding. That's rebranding. And rebranding a broken structure still leaves it broken underneath. Real rebuilding means saying goodbye to the old version of you, the one who needed validation to feel valuable, the one who chased approval, the one who avoided pain, the one who built their life on external outcomes instead of internal alignment. That version is done. And it's painful to let go. Even when the old version of you wasn't serving you, it still felt familiar. It still gave you identity. It still gave you something to point to. And now, without it, you feel like a ghost in your own life. Like you're walking around in a world that no longer has a place for you. That's not a failure. That's the in-between. That's the space where transformation actually happens. Because the moment you let go of who you were, you create room for who you could be. But that space in the middle, that void, that silence, most people run from it. They fill it with noise, with distractions, with performance. But if you can stay there, if you can sit in the tension of the unknown, you begin to hear your real voice. The one that was buried beneath the noise. The one that isn't trying to impress anyone. The one that's not driven by fear. The one that says, what do I actually want? Who do I want to become? What does success feel like to me? Not what I was told it should look like. This is the beginning of self-authorship, writing your own code, choosing your own definitions, and it starts with asking deeper questions. What do I value? Not what do I say I value, but what do I prove through my actions? What do I believe about myself when everything is stripped away? What kind of life would I build if no one else had an opinion about it? These are not easy questions. They will not yield answers in a day. They will surface uncomfortable truths. You will see where you've been living someone else's version of success, where you've been chasing someone else's dream, where you've been measuring your life by someone else's ruler. But once you see that clearly, you can begin to make new decisions, not from a place of shame, but from a place of power. The power to choose differently. The power to say, that story doesn't fit anymore. That metric doesn't define me anymore. That relationship doesn't serve me anymore. Because rebuilding isn't just about doing. It's about unlearning. Unlearning the need to prove. Unlearning the habit of comparison. Unlearning the belief that your value comes from your performance. That your worth comes from how much you produce. That you are only as good as your latest result. That narrative might have driven you once. It might have pushed you to achieve, but it also burned you out. It hollowed you out. It left you feeling like no matter how much you do, it's never enough. And that is not a sustainable way to live. That is not the foundation for a rebuilt life. So you begin to build a new story, one rooted in truth, one rooted in clarity, one rooted in alignment. And alignment doesn't mean ease. It doesn't mean you stop pushing. It means you push for something that actually matters, something that's actually yours, something that doesn't require you to become someone you're not. And the moment you start living that way, where your habits match your values, where your goals match your soul, where your rhythm reflects your truth, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself. That peace will change you. It will soften you, strengthen you, clarify you. And from that space, you begin to take new kinds of action. Not desperate action, not reaction, not performance, but clean action, honest action. Action that doesn't need applause because it already feels like alignment. And when your action is clean, your energy is cleaner. You stop feeling exhausted all the time. You stop feeling like everything is a performance. You stop chasing results that don't mean anything to you. You start choosing what matters. You start building something you want to keep. That's the difference between rebuilding and rebounding. A rebound is fast, loud, impressive on the outside, but empty at the core. Rebuilding is slow, quiet, inconvenient. But when it's done, it lasts because it was built on truth. So you stop chasing appearances. You stop chasing the quick win. You stop trying to convince anyone that you're okay. And instead you do the work, the quiet work, the boring work, the work that doesn't look good on paper, but feels right in your soul. The middle of the rebuild is where most people give up. Not because they're lazy, not because they're weak, but because it's the place where you've done the work and the results haven't shown up yet. You've let go of who you were, but you're not yet who you want to be. You've stripped away the old habits, the old roles, the old patterns, but the new ones don't feel natural yet. They're still awkward, still fragile, still unproven. This in-between space feels like a void. You're not where you were, but you're not where you're going. And the temptation to rush back to something familiar becomes overwhelming. You start bargaining. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should go back. Maybe that life wasn't so bad. But you know that's not true. You didn't walk away from that version of you by accident. You let go because it was killing something inside you. And going back would only bury that voice again. This is the part of the process that requires faith. Not in some outside force, not in circumstances, but in yourself, in your ability to keep showing up without a scoreboard, to hold your standard when no one's clapping, to stay true to the new path, even when it feels like you're walking it alone. And you are walking it alone. Because this part of the rebuild isn't loud, it's not public, it's not inspiring, it's mundane, repetitive, quiet. You'll be doing things over and over again and wondering, is any of this working? But it is. It's always working. Because repetition builds identity. You are training yourself, training your nervous system to stay grounded, training your mind to stay disciplined, training your emotions to not hijack your actions. Every time you follow through, even when it's hard, you add weight to the new foundation. You prove to yourself, this is who I am now. But you can't just wait for motivation. You can't depend on momentum. You have to become someone who is built on rhythm. That means showing up because you said you would, because you promised yourself, because the future version of you depends on it. And that rhythm starts to feel like your edge, because most people can't do this. Most people need validation to stay consistent. They need recognition to keep going. But when you rebuild from nothing, you don't have that luxury. You're doing the work in the shadows, and it will feel like no one sees you. But here's the truth. The person who keeps going when no one sees them becomes someone no one can ignore later. Because that kind of consistency isn't common. It isn't taught. It's earned. It's forged. It's built in the quiet grind. And when the results finally start to show, when the new life begins to take shape, it's not because of luck. It's because you stayed when it would have been easier to quit. That's the moment where you start separating. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because most people stopped short. Most people talked themselves out of it. Most people reached for comfort when they should have chosen discomfort, but you didn't. You kept showing up, and now your foundation is stronger. But this is also the time when you have to be ruthless with distraction. Because now that you're building momentum, everything will try to pull you off track. Old habits, old people, old emotions, they'll all come back. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is trying to keep you safe, familiar, predictable. You have to remember, you are not obligated to stay who you were. You are allowed to outgrow old versions of yourself. You are allowed to stop returning to the environments that made you feel small. You are allowed to decline invitations that pull you away from your growth. Boundaries become a necessity now, not because you're angry, not because you're arrogant, but because you're focused. You're rebuilding a life that cannot coexist with the distractions that broke you. You're building a mind that can no longer tolerate the noise. This is when you start protecting your time like it's your future. Because it is. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for saying no to people. You stop letting guilt run your calendar. And you begin to schedule your life around what matters most, not what's most convenient. Because when you rebuild, time becomes your currency. Not money, not approval, not comfort. Time. And how you spend it will reveal whether you're committed or just interested, whether you're ready to grow or just talking about it, whether you're going to finish this or just use it to feel better for a while. And when your priorities align with your time, everything else gets clearer. The confusion fades. The self-doubt gets quieter. The resistance loses power because you're not scattered anymore. You're locked in. You're anchored. And anchored people move differently. They're not easily thrown off. They don't get derailed by emotions. They don't chase everything. They know what season they're in. They know what matters right now. And they build like their life depends on it, because it does. So if you're in the middle, if the new you hasn't fully arrived yet, don't rush it. Don't try to skip the process. Don't look for shortcuts. Instead, look at your days, your habits, your patterns. Ask yourself, am I moving like someone who's rebuilding something real? Because the answers are in your patterns, not your feelings, not your intentions, your patterns. And those patterns will either reinforce the old you or construct the new one. One choice at a time, 1 hour at a time, one routine at a time. There's a point in the rebuild where everything starts working, but nothing feels different. Your routines are locked in. Your habits are stronger. You've let go of what was breaking you. You've silenced most of the noise. And yet, there's still a voice in your head that says, why don't I feel different? Why doesn't it feel like I've arrived? Why do I still feel like I'm behind? That's the final test. The test of emotional endurance. The test of being consistent without emotional reward. The test of trusting the system you've built, even when your feelings haven't caught up. Because rebuilding yourself from nothing isn't just about effort. It's about learning how to operate without applause, without constant reassurance, without the emotional high of validation. Most people tie their identity to how they feel. If they feel confident, they act confident. If they feel motivated, they show up. If they feel inspired, they execute. But feelings are inconsistent. They're chemical. They're unreliable. And if you only move when you feel good, you'll never finish anything. So you start decoupling your identity from your emotions. You stop asking, how do I feel? And start asking, what's required of me right now? You stop evaluating your progress based on mood and start evaluating it based on movement. Did I do the work? Did I keep the promise? Did I stay in alignment? That becomes the measure. That becomes the win. Because feelings will catch up. They always do. But they follow behavior, not the other way around. And the moment you understand that, you become free. Free to build without needing to feel ready. Free to execute without needing to feel inspired. Free to move without needing external permission. And in that space, you become powerful. Because now you're not led by the rise and fall of your emotional weather. You're led by standards, by systems, by principles. And principles are stronger than moods. Systems are stronger than emotion. Discipline is stronger than desire. You stop waiting to feel like doing the work. You just do it. You stop needing every day to feel like a breakthrough. You just keep stacking the small wins. You stop needing your new life to feel exciting all the time. You start finding fulfillment in the repetition, in the rhythm, in the integrity. And something begins to shift. not in your results, but in your spirit. You start feeling proud of yourself in a way you never have before, because you know what it took to get here. You know how many silent battles you had to win. You know how many times you wanted to quit, but didn't. That kind of pride can't be bought. It can't be faked. It comes from endurance, from alignment, from keeping your word to yourself when it would have been easier to run. And the deeper you go into that space, the more bulletproof your identity becomes. You no longer need external validation because your internal validation is solid. You know who you are. You know what you stand for. You know what you're building. And the longer you live in that space, the more you start to attract what matches it. People who respect your standards, opportunities that fit your direction, environments that support your growth. Because your external world is starting to match your internal structure. It's not luck, it's alignment. It's the natural consequence of living in truth for long enough that your life can no longer deny it. And that's where things begin to compound. Not because life got easier, but because you got clearer, stronger, sharper. You eliminated the distractions that used to slow you down. You unlearned the habits that used to sabotage your progress. You outgrew the identity that used to make you doubt yourself. But don't confuse this moment with the finish line. This isn't the end. This is the part where you stop rebuilding from nothing and start building something new, something bigger, something you couldn't have handled before, but now you're ready. And that requires a new level of vision, not just survival anymore, but strategy, not just discipline, but direction. You're not just trying to fix what broke. You're building what didn't exist before. A life that's not about escaping pain, but about pursuing purpose. You start asking different questions. Not, what do I need to get through this week? But, where do I want to be in 5 years? What legacy am I building? What kind of man or woman am I becoming? Not just in public, but in private. Because this is where the rebuild turns into a renaissance. Not just healing from the past, but designing the future. Not just avoiding the mistakes, but becoming the kind of person who makes better decisions by default. Because that's who you are now. That's how you live now. And every decision reinforces it. Every time you say no to distraction. Every time you say yes to responsibility. Every time you hold the line when it would be easier to lower the bar. That's the life you're building. That's the person you're becoming. And yes, you're still human. You'll still fall sometimes. But now you get back up faster. You course correct sooner. You no longer spiral for days. You no longer abandon the process. You recalibrate and move. Because you're no longer rebuilding, you're evolving. You know you're rebuilding the right way when the past no longer owns you. When you can look at the damage, not with shame, not with denial, but with clarity, with responsibility, with power. Not because you've erased what happened, but because you've outgrown it. You've built something stronger on top of it. This is the stage where resilience turns into wisdom, where everything you've gone through, everything you thought was breaking you, now becomes a resource, a lesson, a tool, not something to hide, something to build from. Because you didn't just survive it. You didn't just make it through. You used it. You mined it for strength, for insight, for clarity. And now your life reflects it. Not perfectly, not without scars, but with power, with focus, with intention. You stop defining yourself by what you lost. You stop defining yourself by who left. You stopped defining yourself by what didn't work out. And now you define yourself by who you became in the aftermath. That's the mark of someone who rebuilt from nothing. Not someone who recovered everything they had, but someone who created something new, better, deeper than what was lost. Because what was lost needed to go. It served a purpose, but it couldn't carry you forward. And now that you've done the work, now that you've lived the process, something else starts to happen. People begin to notice. They start asking, what changed? They sense the clarity, the peace, the edge in your voice, the calm in your presence. And most of them will assume it was a breakthrough, a single event, a moment of magic. But you'll know the truth. It wasn't a moment. It was 1,000 quiet decisions. 1,000 times you chose discipline over distraction, honesty over avoidance, integrity over comfort, silence over noise, work over pity, repetition over drama. It was slow, it was unglamorous, but it was real, and that's why it lasted. This is when you begin to lead, not just yourself, but others. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've lived the questions, because you've held the tension, because you've stopped pretending. And in a world full of performance, your authenticity becomes rare. You stop needing to impress. You stop needing to explain. You stop needing to be anything other than solid. And that solidity, it attracts, not followers, not fans, but people who are hungry for the same thing: truth, strength, simplicity. And now your work becomes about more than just you. You've rebuilt yourself, but the purpose of that rebuild wasn't to isolate. It was to contribute, to give, to serve, to lead, to model a different way of living. Because now you carry a quiet kind of credibility, the kind that can't be faked, the kind that can't be taught, the kind that only comes from rebuilding something from the ground up. You don't preach discipline, you live it. You don't talk about alignment, you embody it. You don't need to convince anyone, you just walk it out. But even now, the work isn't over, because rebuilding never really ends. It just evolves. The scaffolding you built becomes a structure. The structure becomes a foundation. The foundation becomes a fortress. But even fortresses need maintenance. Even strength needs reinforcement. So you stay close to the basics. You don't abandon the small things. You don't forget what got you here. The wake-up time, the walks, the journaling, the silence, the reflection, the accountability. These things don't stop when you arrive. They're why you arrived. And they're what will keep you from falling back. Because the old version of you doesn't die. It waits. It lingers. It watches. And it will come back the moment you get soft, the moment you get tired, the moment you say, I've got this, now I can let up. So you don't let up. You adjust, you evolve, you expand, but you never forget. You never take your discipline for granted. You never take your clarity for granted, because you remember what it was like to feel lost, to feel hollow, to feel like you were starting over from nothing. And now that you've built something real, you protect it, you honor it, you sharpen it, you reinforce it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the work, for the process, for the version of you who had the courage to begin. You don't rebuild your life in a single moment. You rebuild it in 1,000 quiet ones, in the silence when no one checks in the stillness where no progress is obvious, in the spaces between the plans where it's just you and a choice, quit or keep going. The truth about rebuilding is that no one hands you the blueprint. No one arrives to walk you through it. No one tells you exactly when it will start to feel better. And for a while, that uncertainty feels unbearable. But it's in that uncertainty that you start to find something solid, yourself. You don't rebuild by fixing everything all at once. You rebuild by making one decision at a time that honors the person you're becoming. You rebuild by doing the small things with excellence. You rebuild by choosing responsibility instead of resentment, clarity instead of chaos, and alignment instead of approval. And it's not loud. In fact, the rebuild is quiet. It's thankless. It's lonely at times. But it's also where you find your voice, your values, your rhythm. It's where you stop trying to be who the world wants you to be and start becoming who you were meant to be all along. If you're rebuilding right now, know this. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're in the process. And the process is working. Even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Because every time you show up, every time you do the hard thing without applause, every time you stay in integrity when it would be easier to run, you're building something unshakable. And eventually, the world will see what you've been building. They'll see the peace you carry, the focus, the strength, the conviction. They'll feel the presence you've earned, and they'll wonder how you got there. But you'll know you didn't get lucky. You didn't get rescued. You did the work quietly, consistently, in the dark. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. And now you are someone who doesn't just survive. You lead, you live, you stand, you build, because you're no longer running from your past. You're walking toward your future with your head up, with your feet grounded, with your actions aligned.